are listening to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. Welcome aboard. Glad you're here with us. Today we are having the opportunity to chat with Yonty Friesem. And Yonty is a very knowledgeable person on inclusion and equity and diversity. He understands a lot about accessibility, and we're going to get into why and what that's all about, as well as a lot of other things about him as we go forward. So Yonty, welcome aboard Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So why don't you start a little bit by telling us just about yourself?
Oh, wow.
I know it started at a log cabin in Illinois, right?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
So from my accent, you can see that, I'm not local, to say the least. I grew up in Israel until my 30s when I looked to have a PhD to support media educators after being an educator myself and feeling that there's not enough support. And then I came to Temple University, then moved to University of Rhode Island. I followed my advisor, Dr. Renee Hobbs, to learn about media education and media literacy. And from there, I got, different jobs. And now I'm at Columbia College Chicago, just got tenure and promoted to associate professor. And very happy to be able to found the MA in Civic Media, the MA in Strategic Communication, and the Bachelor in Communication, as I'm working with other educators and supporting in different initiatives. So that's basically my background.
MA is Master of Arts?
Yes.
Uh-huh. So you have been doing this a little bit and certainly gotten a little bit of expertise and knowledge about the whole process. How did you get into dealing at all with the whole concept of universal design when it comes to media and dealing with accessibility and some of the issues surrounding that?
So during my PhD program, I was working in Rhode Island, and I met a dear friend called Janine Chartier, who is the CEO of Art Equity now, but it was VSA Arts Rhode Island, the Rhode Island branch, from the Kennedy, sponsored by the Kennedy Center. And as we work together on having students who have a variety of disability getting art education, and from my, expertise, media education, she introduced me to Universal Design for Learning as part of the work. And also, since we were asked to provide professional development for educators. And so that goes back to almost 10 years ago, when we did that and start to work together to figure it out, how to help students, but also how to help educators to understand how to implement it.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what universal design means or dealing with accessibility when it comes to filming and fine arts and so on?
Sure. So Universal Design for Learning is the equivalent of universal design, meaning you design for accessibility, but then it's really to apply for a variety of needs and to accommodate that. So when it comes to learning, the idea is to look at the way that the mind is a little bit different in each one of us, and our wiring is different. So we might have a disability, like I have ADHD, and so my mind look and learn differently than somebody else. And also ADHD, there's such a variety of it. So the idea of Universal Design for Learning has three basic things, which is always offer multiple ways of engaging with your students, multiple ways of perception of the information, and multiple ways of expressing that you learn that knowledge. And so understanding that framework, which is, again, very general and there's more specifics, that helps you really address all your students. So when we're talking about media education in my field, that means engagement in a variety of ways, a variety of media. So even if for example, I was a film teacher in high school back in 2001, But it doesn't mean that I only engage with films or videos. I also use podcast. I also use drawing. I use different way to engage the students, different tactics of engagement. And in perception, it's I show the same information in different ways. So that can be, back then I was projecting on the wall. I could draw on the wall. There were different ways that I would do it. And then the last thing is different way of expression. So we're used to there's an exam. Everybody is writing on paper. But what about offering different ways? So if I'm a media educator, maybe some of my students, and I've been doing it at Columbia College Chicago for several years now and advocating for other faculty to do the same, I give my students the questions and they choose how to answer them as long as they actually answer them. So they can record themselves, they can write, they can take pictures and do a photo essay. So they can deliver a PowerPoint. It doesn't matter as long as they actually answer and show me that they are knowledgeable about what I'm asking them.
Did you or do you have today much involvement with outside of learning disabilities and so on, persons with physical disabilities like blindness or other physical type disabilities?
At the college, we have an ASL program. So we do have students who also are hard hearing or need interpretation or are deaf. And I didn't encounter so far a blind student in my 4.5 years at Columbia College. But we had different disabilities that people came. And because I'm using the Universal Design for Learning and very close to the Office of Disability, I'm working on always different ways to have students be able to share their knowledge, their learning, and also learn in the way that will be customized to their learning type, if we can call it that way.
Yeah. Well, I think for blind people, we're in part probably a little bit later than some to discovering and becoming more involved in some kinds of artistic things. But it is happening. And I wouldn't be surprised if you or colleagues at some point start to get more blind people, for example, in programs interested in learning more about art and learning more about even doing film and other kinds of work. Traditionally in acting, for example, people who portray blind people have not been blind people. And now the world of blind people, the organized blind movements, for example, are starting to say there really needs to be more of us doing it. Let us do it. So I'm sure will help shape a different image over time.
And I really hope so, because for example, this program of Civic Media that I founded at Columbia College Chicago would really benefit. What we're trying to do is get as many voices and different voices to come and create media for the greater good and to help the community that they're interested in. So as we have, people who are working on different disabilities, working with indigenous people, working with Black community, for example, in south and west of Chicago, it would be amazing to have somebody who would like to work on art with blind people and see how that can be spread, because I know that we can learn a lot from it. So I really hope that, that will happen soon.
I suspect it will very much be a two-way learning street, which is okay too.
And that's how we work. Exactly.
So you have, however, done a lot of work with people in terms of learning disabilities and so on. So how has that all worked? What are some of your experiences and the challenges that you faced?
I mean, that goes back to 20 years ago. I was 23 years old when I say thrown into the classroom. Not exactly, but I was hired 2 days before the first day of school, and I was putting 39 hours per week teaching 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade high school students media. And that specific school was in a very tough neighborhood in the center, like near Tel Aviv. And the kids were really struggling personally, family wise, learning. And most of them were not diagnosed with whatever was their, disability. If it was emotional, if it was physical, neurological, or whatever it was. So I'm 23-year-old, don't have too much experience in teaching, was then asked to be there. And that was my kind of boot camp to like really listening and understanding and seeing that what I perceive as something is not necessarily the same for the other. And so really by committing to being with them, listening, seeing what's going on, checking with them, and just being them and showing care, because that's really the emotional like way of connection as an educator. That's what creates the trust to then build learning. There's not going to be learning if there's no engagement, and that's the first thing of universal design for learning. You need to engage, have the trust, and then go together. As I say, it's two-way learning. It's never just the educator teaching the students. So that was like the beginning of my journey to really understand that I need to be humble, and I don't know what other people are going through, and I need to listen to what's going on, and then as negotiate what can we do together, how can we get there together.
And I would presume that you had some successes, especially once you learned that it's all about establishing a rapport, it's all about gaining trust, and also on your end probably doing some learning to trust.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Goes both ways.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, going back to that, initial experience that was very, crucial for me, the students were sure that I was the one to blame for their teacher who left, which obviously had nothing to do with it. But I was there, and I was just there, like with whatever they needed in the editing room, in the filming, and I was there to support. They were throwing things at me. They were like spitting in the class. There were, slurs, and like it was very, very tough. But they couldn't get rid of me in the sense of they were trying different tactics to see like, to make me leave. But the fact that they saw me staying there and wanting to help them genuinely, that earned their trust. And that was tough. That was, several months that took to earn. But once I earned that, that's for life. I'm still, in contact with some of them. Some of them became filmmakers, and it was gratifying in the long run. Yeah, and like every educator, it takes time to see the fruits of your harvesting so long. But yeah, that's like how it worked, with a lot of work on my part to show that I'm really genuinely there, and I don't think I'm superior or know better than them.
Wow. So you were thrust into it. What they must have liked or had a great liking for the previous teacher.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. He was there like, since they arrived. So yeah, it was tough.
Well, of course, when you have a beloved teacher and then someone else comes in, yeah, it is always a challenge. And it is all about trying to get people to understand. I'm sure that there were some who just refused to open up and recognize that there was value in a new teacher.
I mean, eventually they did. It was really like a bravery test, or I don't know how to call it, kind of how much will I endure? And the fact that I did was something for them to say, oh, okay, so I guess he wants to be here. He cares about us. He wants to actually hear and help us to have our opinions shared. And they would make film about their experiences and things. And so my help was crucial for them to get their message across.
When did you know that you had really broken through to them?
When the I don't know if to call it misbehavior, but the interruption really, really wind down. And as I'm saying, it took several months, like 6 months. So that was very tough. But as I saw that they, started to come happily to the class, they would share with me more personal things that were going on and were really focusing on the work and not being disruptive, that's where I saw the change.
And then they started becoming engaged.
Yeah.
So you say you still are in touch with some of them, which is always cool.
Yeah. It's now like 20 years of like connection and seeing, their family, their kids, their career. So it's very gratifying to hear, and some of them still, like, it was amazing to hear that they're still like joking, the group of friends, how they would torture me. So they knew that they were torturing me.
Yeah.
So that was part of it. Yeah.
Do some of them still come and seek any input or advice from you, or?
Sometimes, yeah, here and there. Again, I mean, I have a whole ocean and half of the globe like distance. Uh, so it's not like I can see them like personally one on one, but yes, there is social media, there is emails. So yes, definitely there are different things that they're, making movie and asking like, what do I think, and here and there. So it's very gratifying.
That's as cool as it gets. I understand that whole experience and that concept well. I remember my sophomore geometry teacher, Dick Herbolsheimer, and I became friends when I was a sophomore. And in reality, we still communicate to this day. And that's been quite a long time now, since 1965. So it is a lot of fun when you have a teacher that lasts and does well, and that you still get to talk with and actually become a friend with. It's a jewel in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I understand that from some of our discussions that you've done some work with foster children, and that kind of got you on the road to a little bit of dealing with accessibility and so on. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's not like there's no foster care system in Israel, but it's very different. And I was never encountering that when I was in Israel. But when I came to the States to do my PhD, the first semester at the University of Rhode Island, because of my background as an educator and working with I was like a special educator, homeroom teacher, basically in Israel. So I had a lot of experience. I was approached to be part of a project called First Star Academy. And that's it's a Hollywood-based non-for-profit organization that helps across the country foster youth to help them get into college. The research have been shown from 2011 that if you're in foster care, no matter your race, religion, gender, you're less likely to graduate from college. Like, that's the most like horrible factor that will prevent you, basically. So what the organization is doing is supporting high school students to be more familiar with university settings, and academically and also emotionally support them so that they can go to college. So as part of that, I was asked to be in charge of the media classes, which would be basically the fun part, the less academic. It's not the math or the language arts. But as such, I worked on, applying UDL, applying Universal Design for Learning, and applying all the strategy that I've learned in Israel to work with the foster kids. It was a very different setting because it was in the university. It was a summer camp of more than a month when they lived on campus. I also lived on campus as a student. So we basically lived in the same place, saw each other on a daily basis, and we worked at the university academic library, which is like, astonishing, like to make movies and stuff. And it was like one of the most transforming experience that I had in the US. It was just amazing to work with all the different, they're not kids, they were teens. And now they're grown-ups, because we're talking about 10 years ago was the first time I started. So, they're now like getting to their late 20s. So it was really interesting to see and to learn, because as I did before, I was focusing on listening. And since I'm really not familiar with the foster care system, I heard a lot of stories that I didn't know of and didn't know how things works from their perspective. And that's where we decided that part of media literacy education is to know your target audience and to purposefully create a message in whatever media you choose. And so what we decided to do, because there was a lot of anger, frustration, because they wanted to see their families or their siblings, and they were looking at their social worker as like the gatekeeper in a way. So what we decided to do was, okay, let's have your social worker be your target audience, and let's create media that you think will communicate to your social worker what you want. So in the beginning, it was bashing the social worker, saying, you don't understand. It's like, and then as we talked with them, we said, okay, we did some empathy exercises. If you would get this kind of message, would you listen if somebody is bashing you and telling you don't understand? And they said no. So maybe we should change that narrative to really get to the point that you're trying to make. So some did hip hop music, some did websites, some did videos, some did podcasts. And it was really amazing to see the transformation. And also one of the things that I later on published about with my colleagues was the feedback. Because being kind of, I'm calling it victim of art school, but I did 4 years of film school, and my teachers thought that it's like part of their job to criticize the work and basically give what they saw as constructive criticism, but actually was just bashing my work and saying I don't know anything and I should listen to them because they're the experts. And so since then, I really don't buy this thing of constructive criticism. I think criticism is criticism. You think it's constructive, but it's not. So I'm working on empathic feedback, and that seems to work as we go along, because we needed to tweak some stuff that we thought would be empathic, but we're not empathic. And they taught us what is the right sequence that feels. And, as they came back, like even the fourth year, they were seeing me and they say, oh, let's do the empathic feedback. And let's, and knowing how to receive that feedback from really a caring and a compassionate way to make it better, but not just to bash and feel that I'm the instructor superior and I know more. So that was a long answer.
Can you give, it's fine. But now you have me curious about a couple of different things, and I want to do this one first. So tell me a little bit more about empathic feedback as opposed to what some people would call constructive criticism, what you were calling constructive criticism, which necessarily isn't really constructive, but a lot of criticism. So can you give me an example of the difference?
So I love to tell that story which happened to us, since all of us in the camp with the foster youth didn't know too much. So we did our own research of kind of trying to understand, but research is one thing, and then actually, being in the encounter with the teens is different. So we came up with, we were looking like what would be an efficient feedback, and we saw that there is something called the sandwich feedback. I don't know if you know that. So that's basically the bread is the positive, then you put the negative, and then you put the positive. And we thought that would be brilliant. That would be, kind of sugarcoating, and that will work, and they'll, be very happy about. And so we tried to implement it, and it was a disaster, because they saw our bullshit. Like, they knew that, like, we're not really saying the positive is just sugarcoating, as I said. It was actually the negative part. And they were like, okay, what's the negative? And I was like, okay, that's not working. And some of them, like, one of the stories that, I don't like to tell, it's a horrible story, but it demonstrates how horrible it was. A student was so afraid of receiving that feedback, the positive, negative, positive, that the second before he was supposed to be in front of the class and receiving the feedback, he pressed on the delete button that deleted the whole website he worked for a month. And that's it. The whole work was gone because he couldn't handle like the feedback, which again was not really feedback, was criticism.
Right.
So that's a sandwich feedback, which, there's a lot of research about it afterwards when I looked at, like, delving more into it, how ineffective it is and how the students can read between the line that, again, it's really the negative there. So what we did is we changed that part. And what we decided to do, and why I call it empathic, is two things. One is all the statements, there's 4 statements. All the statements start with I. And that helps for the person who's listening, because if you start and stating using I think, I love, I wonder, I see, you hear that, okay, it's you, it's your perspective. So that statement starting with an I, put it in perspective of like, okay, I can receive it or not, but that's your bias, it's your assumption, it's your like way of looking. So that was one thing that we changed, that it's not just your editing doesn't work. No, I think, or I don't see what's working here, or something like that. So that was change number 1. The second was this 4 parts that evolved during the years as we got feedback from them about what works and what doesn't work. So the sequence goes as to noting. I saw, I heard, I felt, you just give a summary of what was your own experience, kind of an observation of what was the experience of consuming that media. Then you move to appraise. I loved how you, and you need to be detailed, because if I say to you, I love the music of your video, it's not helpful for you. You're like, okay, what does it mean you love? But if I say I love the music because it made me feel such and such, at this moment I was so stressed, and then I heard the music and made me feel, that's helpful to see if it's really the effect that I wanted to make or not. So that's the second thing, like appraise basically. The third thing is a suggestion from my own perspective. If I were you, I would do this and this and this. So by framing it that way, it's just a suggestion. And I might not get exactly to why you want to do it and how you want to do it, but that's how I suggest doing it. And you can take it or leave it. It's up to you. And the last thing ends with a question, a wonder of like, I wonder, like, what did you do here? Why did you do this? And I don't understand this and this, how that, so that it creates this kind of dialogue with the other person. That was significantly different because it created really a conversation, a dialogue from a genuine place, and not a bashing, like I'm trying to show my power and that I'm smarter than the other person I'm giving the feedback to.
And the reality is, it seems to me that what you're saying and describing is valuable for anyone who deals with anyone else and making suggestions. It goes far beyond film school, needless to say.
Oh, for sure, right? Very difficult to implement it, but yes, that's definitely. And I was introduced to nonviolent communication. That was a major basis for that, and now I'm teaching a class of nonviolent communication at the college, and also working with other educators to use that, because that's really based on empathy. Marshall Rosenberg, the late Marshall Rosenberg, called it language of life, of like really communicating with the person because you really want to communicate with the other human beings.
Well, so you now tweaked another question. You say it's very difficult to implement. Why?
Because we're human beings, and there's always struggles and things, and we have our own needs, and it's very difficult to find the balancing act between verbalize what is our needs and understanding that it might not always work with somebody else's needs and our emotions. Like, we're emotional beings, so it's not like our needs don't matter, they matter. But we need to understand that we're working in a society with other people. So it needs to be somewhere a compromise and a will to work together to figure it out, which a lot of our structures, especially education, are very oppressive if you think about it. The fact that I'm as an educator needs to give grades, that puts me in a position of power. That puts me in a position that I need to evaluate by a grade the students. And so I found different strategy to overcome that, to really go back to a dialogue place. But the system is built in a very difficult, challenging way that doesn't really is about the need and the human being.
We become so much involved with power and authority, and we don't always learn easily how to take people where they are. And maybe there's a place where we believe that they need to go, but we don't generally like to look at people where they are. They should be like us or they're useless. And we teach that as a society. And that's one of the things I think we have to get over.
Yeah. It's very sad, and obviously the technology is amazing, the way it's like advancing, but the premise of social media has been really the counter. Like social media is putting us in connection, but very toxic connection. There is positive connection in many ways, but Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, they're not designed for dialogue. They're designed for amplifying voices in one way, but not reciprocally. And there are efforts like Minds, which is social media that is built on dialogue.
How does that work?
It works in a way that you post and then it's part of her like conversation thread between people. Like Twitter does have an option to reply and then somebody can reply to you, but the fact that it's reply on reply, you cannot edit, and you basically have only now more characters, but 120, or it's double now, but it doesn't really allow for a conversation. And so if you're talking about a conversation that is not like, so Clubhouse, for example, is an audio conversation. So you really can talk between people in the room at real time, or you can listen to the recording, but then not really participate. But Minds trying asynchronously to have that with posting, that people can post like thoughtful, like Reddit in a way, have it in some capacity, a more dialogical way of structure.
Right. What about LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn, there's not so much restriction like Twitter, but I see it very similar to like Facebook and Twitter in that sense. People are sharing their whatever message they want to share, and people can like and can add to it. Like usually it's a sentence, and sometimes you get into like a whole thread of one say something and then going back and forth, but it doesn't really seem like it's like a genuine like dialogue. But it's a little bit better, but very, very problematic. And I want to go back to what you were saying, because that's the whole base about inclusion and accessibility, is understanding the other person in front of you is a human being, right? And they have needs and emotions exactly like you. And so how we can work together. And that doesn't seem to be the general notion. Like if you're working in your community, yes, people might be more inclusive in their small community. But at the larger, once you get to political debate or you get a little bit out of your comfort zone, always like it's retrieving to like safeguard and kind of like I need my needs to be met and I'm not listening.
When you and I first began communicating, of course, we did that through LinkedIn, and I sent you a message and you responded. And then I gave you more information about the podcast. And very frankly, what I was working toward was what we finally did, which was to have a real-time conversation. I think email's lovely. I think social media has some places, some versions of it more than others, but there's nothing like having a conversation.
Right. And you didn't put like a post on my wall or you did it like as a private message. So, you respected like privacy and looked for engagement as basically like a hook here. Like, let's continue a conversation on another platform. So that was kind of like the jump. So yes, in that sense, it works. I'm getting a lot of, different connection through Twitter, through LinkedIn. But I think what social media promised us in the early 2000s was, to make the world a better place, to connect better. And what we can see now is that it's not working that well because of the economical kind of structure, the business model of those social media. And we can see the whole debate now with Elon Musk, like buying Twitter, and people who are afraid, people who are for it, and the whole discussion about monetizing tweets and stuff. So it goes back to that part that social media is monetized and it's a business. And it's really not about making the world a better place. It is about connecting people, but I'm not sure connecting the way that I would like or see that was the premise of connecting that way.
I'm not sure we're really connecting. There are interactions somewhat, but really connecting and really getting to know people on any of the social media platforms isn't anywhere near the level of getting to really understand and interact with someone that you get when you have a direct, real communication. And none of the platforms, including email for that matter, do it. Texting doesn't do it. Yes, you can text and you can respond. And maybe because texting is a little bit more, especially with the younger generation, real time, they might say, well, but we are connecting, but we're still missing the real conversation and all the nuances of that you get when you're interacting with a person in real time directly.
Yeah, definitely. That's, we can see that there is sometimes the illusion of reality, but understanding that social media has its own boundaries, and the person you communicate with, you see just the image of the person, and they might tweet or post or share or put a TikTok video in the middle of something else that's going on, and not seeing the larger picture. Because like when we're now engaged in a dialogue, like obviously, the frame of the Zoom now is showing just part of the room I'm in. And there's a lot of other things that are happening around here, but still there is something that is more genuine and more realistic than the social media that is really like a milli kind of thing of my life that people are sharing, and other people are sure to interpret it as such, or you can see so many times when people misinterpret messages, and then it becomes like a huge like fume and like Twitter rage over it.
Yeah. You said something earlier I wanted to ask about. You said that some of the educational things like dealing with foster children and dealing with children in class is somewhat different in Israel than it is here. How are they different?
Well, I mean, culturally, it's. I'll give you one example. When the first class I taught, and that was not, I had my first class in undergraduate that I taught at University of Rhode Island in the spring of 2012. So 10 years ago, exactly, I was teaching a film class. I had 6 students, and then the first class I'm going in, and I'm sharing some stuff. We like do things, and then I'm teaching something, and then I'm asking questions, and then nobody raised their hand, nobody answered, nobody, like silence. I'm like, okay. So I'm trying on a different question, nothing. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I, after that class, very frustrated, go back to like American friends and asking them, is my accent so horrible? Like, what's going on? Like, they don't understand what I'm asking them. And they're telling me, no, they're just like shy and are like worried about getting the wrong answer. So I said, okay. And then the next time I come and then I ask them to write their answer, let them time to edit their written answer, and then they read it. So then suddenly I got more engagement. In Israel, I wouldn't be able to say a word in class. Like, the students think they know much better, and they need to like talk, they need to argue with the teacher, which I was used to that. So coming to a place that is more respectful and more kind of, listening, I was like, wow, okay, that's very different. So that's really like one anecdotal example, but obviously there's a lot of cultural differences being in the Middle East, warmer country, warmer temperament, and being in a constant state of safety issues. create like a lot of differences versus, there is a lot of safety issue here in the US, but it affects different students differently, and culturally there is a little bit, more kind of like listening, I think, practices than in Israel.
Do you think that there was or is more fear in Israel and that makes a difference? Do you think fear is a part of it? And I don't know that it is. It's just something that popped
No, I
into the
would say
brain.
the opposite. Like, and it might be because of the trauma, the collective trauma that is happening in Israel. Is that, it's one of the happiest place, which you would like, really, like, how can that be? But people understand that they're in constant threat, and you just learn to live with it. Like in the late 90s, when there are buses that were, like bombed, like in the center of Tel Aviv, the day after one bus was bombed, I took the same line with the same path, because it's like, okay, if I'm going to be blown up, I'm going to be blown up. I don't have control over that. I'm not going to let the terrorist decide for me what is going to be my life pattern, and I'm just going to, So it is something that is in the psyche of the daily, but not like as overtly. So there's really no fear in that sense. I mean, it's very depressed, like in some level, but I think in the US there's more fear about the authority, fear of like being wrong, of like, so the engagement is different. Like there is something in Israel that is more in your face, kind of. Whatever happens, like you'll know if somebody likes you or don't like you. In the US, you might not know that, which is very European culture in that sense of like people not always sharing what they think about you. But in Israel, there's no problem. You know very quickly, for good or bad. So it's very different culturally. And it's not one is better than the other. It's just very, very different. And it takes time to adjust to it.
Is it a self-confidence to a degree kind of thing?
Chutzpah, yeah, I guess there's something to that. The sabra kind of, that's the symbol of the Israeli, like pointy kind of from the outside, but very soft from the inside. So, yeah, there might be part of it.
So, universal design learning obviously is very important to you. Why is that?
Because I think that when I reflect to my own learning, I see how that could have been helpful. Like when I started to not being so good in math, when I had attention issues as an adolescent. And again, I was diagnosed with ADHD only a year and a half ago. So it's not like my whole life I knew I had ADHD. I assumed that most likely I have it. But it was really with the pandemic that I was like in such stress that I said, okay, let's see what's going on neurologically. And so I see universal design for learning as a way to really engage all students and best practices of education. And I see how my own self, like early self, would benefit from that. It took me 9 years to finish my bachelor degree. I did finish a PhD in a foreign language, basically, successfully, but it took a huge toll. And if I would have known, if my teacher would have used that, I know it would be much easier. And I know I have a lot of privilege that I'm, coming to as a learner. And most of the students I'm encountering don't have that privilege. And so that undermines even more the learning. And if we want to look at the better good, the greater good and the better society, we need to do a lot of work in education to really reach everybody. That's not going to solve our social issues. That needs to be legislation, funding, that there needs infrastructure for a lot of things that needs to happen. Education is not the only solution. But in my area of education, I think universal design for learning is a necessity to really address every student in the class and not doing what I hate, which is the bell curve of saying, well, we'll go to the middle, so the excellent students will take care of themselves, and the bad students, that's collateral damage, it's okay. No, it's not okay. Like, we need to reach every student, and there are ways of doing that.
You certainly seem to typify the concept that as a teacher, you also do need to be a learner, which we've talked about, and that you are better for the fact that you regard yourself as a learner just as much as your students are.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's, there is this kind of the sage on the stage and the guide on the side. So I definitely see myself as the guide on the side that also learn from them, because it goes back to what I talked before. If I have all the knowledge and my students are waiting for me to pour information to them, I'm just exercising oppression, and I'm just keeping the system as is. It's not like I don't have knowledge to share, but they also have very valuable knowledge for me that they can share. And if we really experience this dialogue, it's like, I don't know if you know Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So one of his elements is synergy. And what he says about synergy is, once you experience that, you want to go back to that, because that's a type of collaboration that is so addictive that you understand that that's how real collaboration should work. And that's the same thing. If students will experience a genuine reciprocal relationship, they'll want to go back to that, and they'll be kind of, pass it forward, kind of do it, and make the world a better place in that sense. So that's why I'm such a big advocate of that, because that's the relationship I want to have when I'm going to my primary care physician, when I'm calling my healthcare and fighting with them and not getting somebody who's reading me a script and not really listening to what I'm asking, because they have a script and there's only 5 scenarios there and my scenario doesn't exist there, so they cannot help me. So the whole system has that. And if we start to break that, that's the way to really bring more inclusion and accessibility, and understanding that it's not like there's only 5 scripts because the algorithm or the designer of the algorithm decided on that, because that's what they knew. It's like, let's bring everybody to the conversation. Let's be open and listen to what's happening, because each one has a unique story, unique circumstances that might challenge what you think that or the practices that you do.
You raise a really interesting and relevant point, that all too often today in healthcare, they want you to fit into a certain mold. And it's not just healthcare, but I know my wife is a paraplegic and has been in a chair her entire life. But a lot of her needs and a lot of the kinds of things that she needs to deal with don't fit the same mold as an amputee or a person who becomes paralyzed later in life. And we find that the healthcare system doesn't really understand that all that well. Or for me as a blind person, I've gone and visited with a number of ophthalmologists who have absolutely no knowledge of how to deal with a person who is blind. And I've experienced some major challenges because I don't fit their view, both from a standpoint of competence as a person who happens to be blind and able to do things, much less that my eyes have not become a part of me in terms of the way I function, other than when they aren't doing right, like conjunctivitis or other things like that. And healthcare just doesn't always like it when some of us don't fit the mold that we think that people should be fitting in. And I know that's just as true in education. It's certainly true with a lot of different kinds of companies and bosses and so on. Leadership styles sort of go the same way. And if we can't really learn to grow with the people that we work with and understand them, then we're the ones that are going to lose out in the end.
Yeah. And that goes to politicians with their own constituents that they're listening to. But what about the people who are part of their that maybe not vote for them? And are they listening? And what kind of legislation is happening, right? And
sure.
The whole debate, yes, there is so much research. Research of algorithm of oppression, for example, about it's not the algorithm that is racist or oppressive, but somebody needed to design it, right? So when you talk about the healthcare for your wife, like, who's the person who created those policies? Have they ever talked to somebody who would be impacted in that sense? Do they understand the scope? And it's so vast in healthcare that you can't really do that. So, like, how can we make mechanism that will be a little bit more open to a variety of different narratives, different story, different needs that the person who was in charge may have not encountered or seen?
Yeah, exactly right. And, you know, the ultimate thing is that it's important to always try to learn things. I know for me, for the last 20 years, as you may know, I have been a keynote speaker, a public speaker, and I traveled the world and talk about September 11th. I talk about my experiences. I talk about lessons we should learn and so on. But even through all of that, anyone who talks to me about that and my career as a keynote speaker will hear me say, if I don't come away from any event I attend learning more than I hope that I am able to impart to the people who are listening to me, if I don't learn more, then I haven't done a good job, because all of those people have things to teach me. And it's one of the reasons that when I speak, I like to go early. I'd like to spend time with people at the event, because I will learn more the more I get to dialogue with them. So I don't like to just go and speak and leave. I like to go early if I can, and I like to definitely interact. And it's the only way to really get the best flavor for what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
So it makes for an interesting world. So you've talked about the concept of civic media. When did you hear about that, and tell me more about it?
I mean, it's a pretty new concept, started in 2006 by Henry Jenkins, then was at MIT, now is at USC. And, you know, academics like to put concepts and different definitions, and his definition evolved. In the beginning, it was any media that increase civic engagement, but that doesn't tell you much. So 2011, he revisited and kind of was a little bit more elaborative about how it should be more inclusive, how should it fight oppression. And we have at Columbia College Chicago the only MA in civic media, which is a big pride of me that we were able to do that and letting me lead that curriculum wise. And so our program is fully online, which is also something that is important for part of fighting oppression and accessibility, in the sense of like having people from around the world joining that program and being able to experiencing it. So when I'm talking about the program, I'm explaining that people are making media to drive social change in a very specific community. Going back to what I said about target audience, you need to really be specific. And there is an amazing TED Talk that I love to have my students listen to, and it's "You want to help? ? Shut up and listen! ! And it's a great video that really set the tones of the program, that is about listening to the community. And the students in my program will be the media experts, but they're not the experts of the community. They're experts in community engagement. So what we're really focusing on is having the students learn nonviolent communication, listening skills, and how to leverage the media knowledge that they're learning into really doing those practices to help the community figure out together what are the media-based solution for that. So it can be urban planning, it can be solution journalism, it can be media arts, it can be documentary, filmmaking, podcasting. So there is a variety of things. Your podcast is civic media. You're spreading through the podcast the ideas of accessibility, of inclusion. You're bringing voices and variety of voices to talk about those issues so that people can connect, learn from, and then go and explore it. So this is a civic media project. And we have such a variety of projects. We have a student who's now working at NPR after graduating, a student who is directing a film festival with indigenous youth in New Mexico. We have somebody who's a communication manager for Autism Awareness Network, and the list goes on and on. So it's great to have the opportunity to have this kind of program that is so unique in addressing social issue through media, and it's so interdisciplinary and out of the box that people are like, what are you doing there? But it's very exciting to see the results and to see what the amazing work that our students are doing.
Do you find that when people are making films or podcasts or whatever, that the better ones are the ones who also listen to their own work or observe their own work as they're doing it or afterward, and then, as I like to say, become their own best or worst critic?
So I'll give you one example that I think is one of the highlight of me as a civic media educator. Last year, one of our students decided to do a photo essay as a caregiver to a person with a disability. And they decided to do it together as a dialogue. So my student is a photographer, a photojournalist, and the person she was caring for is a communication specialist and has her own company now, media for accessibility, called Crepe Crab, which is awesome. And what they did is they took the pictures that shows the daily work of a caregiver, very aesthetically, very intimate, but that was a dialogue. They took thousands of pictures, and then together they decided, beside the framing, which one to include, which one not to include. And once they posted it, they also added a dialogue between them, so that you read the dialogue and you can also look at the images. And now they're going to have a gallery, and it was published in Disability Accessibility blog. So this is really a genuine, when you're in a dialogue, it goes back to what we've discussed in the last hour, right? Civic media is about civil dialogue using media. Media is just the conduit to it, but it's real human to human engagement, and that's the core of it.
How do you find that civic media is making a difference in terms of accessibility and inclusion?
So again, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. If it's by, infographic, using social media to campaign awareness, having people be more inclusive. With the work that you're doing in the company that you're working with, having websites be more accessible, and the fact that there's standards and people understand that that's something that they need, that's how civic media can bring an awareness. Having just the button to see, maybe I don't need that, but to see that there is a button there of accessibility, that's part of awareness. That's part of the service that different civic media practitioners are doing to bring more awareness of inclusion, of accessibility.
And that makes perfect sense. It's all about having something that's visible, however it's visible, but having something that's visible that people can see, can interact with, and that specifically sends the message, I'm here to help, as we're discussing here, deal with accessibility and inclusion.
Yeah. I mean, take the example of closed caption. So closed caption was an accessibility requirement with ADA, but once it started to be implemented in bars, the music could be in a crazy volume, or the TV might have been very far away, but there's a closed caption. So that helps everybody to read it, right? So it started with accessibility and actually gave accessibility to many more people they intended to. And that's something that people now are used to, but they were not used to having those closed caption. And in the beginning, people were like, what is this thing? But now it's all accepted. So those are the things that need to be more instituted and seeing. And this is the fight of Civic Media to bring those inclusive practices into all media use.
Well, here's a thought, and then we've been doing this an hour, so we'll have to wrap up here soon. But here's an observation that I've had. Of late, over the last few years, we've seen many television advertisements and commercials. And the commercials have music, a lot of visual information going on the screen, and no dialogue, which systematically and absolutely categorically leaves out a segment of the population. And it seems like that's an increasing trend where we're going backwards in a sense, that getting to the point where it's all about what you see and who cares about what you hear. And I think that's a problem that somehow we need to teach people that they're creating rather than being truly inclusive.
And that goes back to what I said about the genuine work. And if somebody who has that experience and, having a blind person coming to learn civic media and then advocate and learn how to do those things, that's why we need a variety and diverse people with diverse background, because that's where people bring this perspective that hasn't been seen, understood, or accepted by others. But that's the fight. That's basically what needs to happen to be more inclusive.
Yeah. Somehow we have to convince Elon Musk that he needs to make the passenger side of Teslas a little bit more inclusive, because people who are blind can't interact with the radio. They can't interact with anything on their side. It's all touchscreen. But he's not alone in that. Automobile manufacturers have been moving that way again. And it's all about dialogue and recognizing that if you're going to truly be inclusive, then you have to look at areas of the population that you're not necessarily familiar with.
Yeah. And the only way of making it work is what's called participatory action research, which is not the kind of sociologist come and observes the others, but actually a research by dialogue, by doing it together and searching it together. What are the solutions? What are the problems, and how to do it? That's the only way. And in tech companies or other like healthcare, this is not the practices. You just hire a research company, you ask them what to do the research, and that's it. You don't do a genuine participatory action research to really reach all the audience genuinely that you want to serve.
And that makes perfect sense. Well, I want to thank you for being with us today on Unstoppable Mindset. You're certainly helping society in a lot of ways, hopefully become more unstoppable. And I mean that in a very serious way. If people want to reach out to you and contact you or learn more about all the things we've been talking about, how might they do that?
So I'm a Twitter addict. With all what I said about Twitter, I'm still
there. You go.
So Yonty, YONTY on Twitter. But you can find also me on LinkedIn, on Columbia College Chicago website, and at the Media Education Lab. So there is multiple ways of connecting me, since I'm using Universal Design to contact me, because I want to connect and I want to diversify as much as I can all the people that I'm encountering. So I always welcome people to connect with me. And thank you so much, Michael, for this lovely hour and letting me, talk about all my passion. So it's a lot of fun. Don't have a lot of opportunities.
And I like the way you do sound passionate, and that's great. And I want to thank you, Yonty, for being here as well. If people want to learn more, hopefully they will reach out to you. They can also reach out to us, and I can help connect. But I really appreciate all of you listening in, and Yonty, for you being here. If people wish to reach out to me, they can email me, Michael, MICHAELHI @ Accessibe.com. So feel free to email. You can also go to michaelhinkson.com/podcast. That's www.michaelhinkson.com/podcast. And of course, as I always ask people to do, if you will, if you liked what you heard, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. We appreciate it. And Yonty will as well.
Yes.
We'll make sure that you know about it, right?
Thank you so much. Yes, we'll spread the word.
Well, thank you.
So much,
And
Michael.
Thanks for being with us on Unstoppable Mindset.
Mike.